This exercise is going to be a study of the horse in motion. We're going to sketch out a galloping horse. We start out with a basic pinto bean shape here that represents the torso of the animal, and we'll get an outline in place. Rough sketching at this point just to get the layout. I've kind of drawn a light box here as a construction reference. It'll encompass the body of the horse and its legs. So it kind of gives us the outside parameters for what we'll be sketching in. Throwing the head here. Roughly sketch in some of the other features, hind leg. As you can see, I've extended the one front leg down roughly in line with the horse's neck, parallel. The other thing you'll notice is that the hind leg below the hock is at approximately a 90-degree angle to the front leg. Stick another hoof in here. Once again, at this point, we're just doing some rough sketching, getting a sense of where stuff ought to fall. In this particular gait, in this particular drawing, I've got the horse suspended on one foot, and in a gallop, the next stride, that foot will draw up and the horse will be suspended in the air with all 4 feet off the ground. Good point of reference for drawing a horse in motion is the work of Edward Muybridge, who in 1879 set up a series of still cameras and captured a horse running past and established that there is a point in the gait, in the gallop, where the horse has all 4 feet off the ground. Kind of some other highlights here, the prominence on the pelvic area, the trochanter and the hip joint, sketching in some of the large muscle areas here, coming down off of the shoulder. Another area where there's a lot of muscle mass. Bit of horse trivia today. 60% of the horse's weight is borne on its front feet. So if you pick a horse's hoof up, you'll notice that the front foot is larger than the hind foot. It's rounder and covers more surface area and acts as a base for all of that weight. The hind feet are narrower and they're good for digging in and pushing off. So it's a subtlety, but you can kind of tell if folks know their horses if you look at a sculpture and see if they've crafted all 4 feet the same. You know you're dealing with somebody who hasn't looked very closely at a horse. Touching up some details here, putting a smile on his face, putting his little chin in. A little bit of shading just to get a sense of what we're looking at here. Once again, getting rid of all those sharp angles because those aren't found in nature. At this point, I'm going to take a set of calipers set to the horse's head, and we'll do some checks here. Off the withers to the elbow joint and to the chest area. Actually, the femur, and then from the stifle to the hock, which is essentially the kneecap, to the horse's ankle. See that those are all approximately one head. From the on the front foot, from the elbow joint down to the pastern is about one head length. That gives us a sense of proportions. This isn't going to be a terribly artistic rendering. We're only dedicating about 20 minutes to this, but it's a good foundational piece, and you can take it from here and with a little bit of study go on and get a little artsier. I'm just coloring in now to fill that space so that we got something we're looking at. Something to put on your bucket list if you are so inclined, is to get out on a horse and get him into a dead run. It is an exhilarating sensation. My experience, I've only done it one time, and it's memorable, is got out on a pony and opened him up on a stretch of flat ground. You want to be sure of the terrain you're on. And you think when a horse is running along that they kind of have that rocking chair seesaw motion back and forth, but when they get into a dead run, it's like they are suspended in the air. You have the sensation of the hooves hitting the ground. It's like rain hitting on a poorly insulated roof as you're tearing along. But you really don't have the sense, well, you really do have the sense that the horse is just flying, and there you are, suspended in the air above him. The wind is whipping through your face. If something isn't tied down, it's 100 feet behind you before you're aware of it. And at some point you realize that you're going about 40 miles an hour on top of a muscle mass that weighs about 900 pounds and is on an intellectual par with the gopher. Pretty exhilarating. Kind of gives you mind of the suggestion that getting on a horse is a little bit like getting closer to heaven. And of course the rest of that is coming off a horse will get you closer to heaven too. Getting some of the surface features in, show off a little bit of the ribs, kind of where he's dimpled in his hindquarters and his hip area. Darkening what we would call the patella. In the horse it's called the stifle. That's actually it corresponds to its kneecap. And that area that I'm at right now is called the hock. That corresponds to us, to our heel bone. And everything below that is equivalent to what we would call our metatarsals. Same thing with the front end of the horse. You come off of the scapular region, the shoulder blade. The humerus is buried up in the torso of the horse. His elbow is right at the point where his trunk is, and what we would consider to be his knees are actually the 8 carpal bones that we have in our wrist, extending down into what's called on the horse the cannon bone, which actually is equivalent to having our carpal bones fused together, extending down into our finger bones. Very much the same architecture. I pretty much grab whatever pencil is handy when doing these little sketches, just to get some color down, get some shapes down. And we'll go back in a little while, you'll see that I do as much with an eraser as I do with a pencil, which is something of a sculptural technique. You put material on, then you take material off, and at some point you're satisfied, or at least to the point where you're tired of doing it back and forth, and you quit and you say you're done. More trivia, and I think I've mentioned this in other videos. Horse, when it's running, or at any gait, does not open its mouth because it can't breathe through its mouth. Flares its nostrils, and it turbocharges through those nostrils, but the only reason a horse would have its mouth open is if a rider is sitting astride it, pulling on the reins and leveraging the bit to open its mouth up, or it's coming at you to bite you. Well, that's another indication of whether people know what they're dealing with as far as representing the horse in motion. I think I also mentioned that for racehorses, they do now make a huge breathe right nasal strip that opens up the sinus passage so that they can get more air through them. The particular gait that we're dealing with here is a lope or a gallop. Your average horse will have at least 3 gaits, a walk, trot, and a gallop. And there are variations off of that. You've got with what are called gaited horses, or 5-gaited horses, like the saddlebred or the Icelandic. You can sneak in a canter and a sort of a running trot. This old boy here is at a gallop, or for that matter at what we would call a lope or a canter. It seems like horses keep at least one gait just for themselves. It's kind of a dancing trot, and they don't share it with us. As close as you can get to it is with a gaited horse and a pace or a rack, it's called, which is kind of an accelerated trot. But it's like they want to let us know that they're still their own critters and they don't have to share everything with us. At some point I'll add a mane and a tail to this guy, but right now I'm just going back and forth, sort of finessing stuff with an eraser and then touching up with a pencil. Like I said, I don't get too hung up on what kind of pencil I'm using for these exercises. Start out with an HB, go to a 2H solid graphite stick. Here I'm working with a mechanical pencil with HB lead, 7mm, just to finesse some of the detail. You can go back and forth with these guys until the cows come home. I kind of limit myself to about 20 minutes on these exercises, so you get a pretty good rough out. But it's possible to go back and finesse the contours, look at the muscles, the way they ripple on the surface, and really get some nice detail in there. Grabbing that graphite stick there gives me a chance to throw a lot of shading in. Take the eraser again, blend it in a little bit. At some point I'll be satisfied and leave it alone. And this old boy is a little bit of a Roman nose. Roman nose horse is considered to be a little bullheaded or stubborn. That's a stereotype. Doesn't necessarily follow. Up around the pole area there, real prominent with those first two cervical vertebrae. And I've highlighted a little bit where the neck artery is there. Finally, I'll put a little bit of a mane on this boy. And a tail. The thing about the tail is spine actually extends out there. You've actually got some bony mass that comes out. The tail actually falls off of that. So it's not like he's got a broom stuck up him. Doesn't hurt to be aware of the anatomy of these guys. It does dictate how you represent these characters.